Welcome to part 11, and thank you for journeying with me so far. Well, we're still talking about covenant. It's such an important thing that the writer is trying to convey to those who are getting worried about persecution and thinking perhaps going back to the synagogue where they will be safe. And he wants to kind of warn them, encourage them, and exhort them, and that they have a much better thing in Jesus Christ. And so he goes over it again for the third time, and we can learn from it, because it seems to me that in good teaching, you tell your students what you're going to teach, you then teach, and then you tell them what you've taught them. That 3 times helps the lesson to stick in their minds, and having stuck in their minds, to influence their actions for the future. So here in chapter 10, the writer speaks again as Christ, the bringer of the new covenant, for the 3rd time. In chapters 8, he talked about Christ mediating the new covenant. The priesthood is made obsolete. All those perpetual sacrifices, day after day after day in the temple, are no longer necessary. And indeed, within a couple of years, the temple was destroyed, and those sacrifices have never happened again. In chapter 9, he talks about the tabernacle. Center of the old covenant is made obsolete, and therefore its destruction isn't important. And in chapter 10, the law that the old covenant stood for, that was given at Sinai, is made obsolete, because there is a new and better thing. In fact, there is the real thing. And in biblical terms, stating something 3 times confirms it as permanent change. So in chapter 10, he begins by just reiterating that the law is not like the real thing. It's a pale shadow, because it has no ability to make real change. I remember a few years ago the Coca-Cola advert, it's the real thing. Well, what he's wanting to convey is that in Christ Jesus, it is the real thing. And again, quotes from Jeremiah, only when the law is written on the heart can real lasting change occur, when it's deep down within our souls, our mind, our psyche. Verse 2 to 4, again, he reminds us of the proof that the law is powerless, because it has to be repeated. The sacrifice has to be repeated again, to cover sins. And again, the writer goes back to his founding prophecy. It's important for us to remember that he's writing in a rabbinic way, the way the rabbis taught in the Old Testament, because he's writing to not to a non-Jewish audience, he's writing to a Jewish audience, and so he's using the style and the logic that those rabbis used throughout Old Testament history, and even today. That Jesus has made a more pleasing and sacrifice to God, and a permanent one in himself. And again, playing commentary on Psalm 40, that pivotal psalm of David that he uses as his proof text. Verse 11 to 13 stresses the importance of what is being said, and so he repeats it. It's so important that he wants his readers to be absolutely clear that Christ has offered the perfect sacrifice, making all the other sacrifices obsolete, that Christ's sacrifice is effective forever, and the proof is his resurrection and ascension, his elevation to the supreme place of honour at God's right hand. and he now has authority over death and all enemies of God. Right at the end of Matthew's Gospel, he says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations. So he's stating that he has that authority, and he commands us to go out in that authority as ambassadors for his truth. Again, third time, summed up, 3 for completion. And then he quotes from the Jeremiah passage again. A new covenant is in effect, one that lasts forever. And he wants to say, and from that we now have complete freedom. The new and living way is opened. The veil is gone that separated human beings from God. And we have Jesus who stands with us before God to plead our cause. Therefore, and here the letter moves on to a new phase, encouragement and exhortation to remain faithful. And he amplifies that a bit by saying we are washed, therefore we can draw close to God. And just comment, it is a greater sin for a Christian not to come into God's presence as it is for an unregenerate sinner to come without Christ. That we cannot stand before God without Christ standing almost between us in the place to save us. And we need to be reminded that coming to God in prayer is a privilege, and it's something we should be excited about, should be just part of our lives day by day. For God is faithful and he will keep his promises. But we're encouraged too to work out this good news collectively by loving, encourage and meeting with one another. No, he says, don't keep sneaking off one by one back to the synagogue. Keep meeting together to encourage one another. That will strengthen your resolve and your willingness to face whatever you have to face as a Christian. And I'm sure this letter was part of the reason why many of them did and faced persecution and were great representatives, because Christianity spread through the known world and indeed changed the world. So his warnings and his encouragement were heeded, and we're going to move over in chapter 11 to the encouragement side. So he's warned for the 4th time of the perils of going back to their old religion. And he shows how the love of God was made known in Christ. He reminds us that the other side of God's character is judgment. Don't go back and face God's judgment alone. No, face the love of God in Christ, and how awful it will be for those who have known Christ and turned away. And in my experience, many of who have turned away that I've known haven't gone on to lead triumphant lives. They've gone from bad to worse so often, and often have lost the joy and the peace and the security that they once had. So let this be a warning to each and every one of us to keep on keeping Christ at the centre of our lives and not stopping meeting with other Christians to encourage one another. Amen. And so he finishes by saying a reminder that all they've endured for Christ's sake when they first became Christians, don't lose courage now, for you're nearly there. And he quotes Habakkuk, the righteous shall live. This life is not the only life. There is the life beyond the grave, and that is the life that if we trust Christ, we will spend with him in joy for eternity. But of course he says to them, no, having done all these warnings, you're not the sort of people who will turn back. And I pray God that we are not the sort of people who will turn back.